I want to introduce you to a special third person. That's Bruce Richardson. Bruce was here in Wyoming before I came. He was hired almost a decade long before I came here. In fact, he was hired in 1984, so this is his 30th year of teaching for the University of Wyoming. But the important thing about Bruce is that he teaches at the university's campus in Casper. And many people don't know that we have a campus in Casper, but we do. We offer bachelor's degrees in Casper. We have a brand new building that we just moved into in the spring. And we have approximately 20 to 25 full-time faculty in Casper, and they are also served by our extensive outreach offering of courses, and they are part of the almost 25% of UW students who take online courses. But Bruce at Casper is one of the senior faculty members. In fact, he is the acknowledged senior faculty member. And let me give you a sense of just how much everybody agrees on that. When they moved into the new 4-story UW building in Casper, they discovered that while they had told the architect that all faculty offices should be exactly the same size, down to the last square foot, there should be no difference, some architect decided to pull the wall out of one of them. So there was a double-sized office. And everybody agreed that that should be Bruce's office. The only worry is how many bodies will be left on the floor after Bruce retires, trying to fight for that office when he leaves it open. Bruce, when he came into Wyoming, took immediate interest in Yellowstone, and he has used that interest as a focus for understanding wilderness, wildness, and Americans' cultural attraction to it. He's published several essays, and that's going to be his main focus of today's talk. But I can't introduce Bruce without mentioning his interest in art. Because Bruce has been one of the pillars of the arts community here in Wyoming. He has been president and longtime board member of the Wyoming Arts Council, and he regularly writes reviews of art and art exhibitions, not just in Wyoming, but throughout the region. He's been involved in Casper's Nicolason Art Museum, even serving as the chair of its board. In addition, he's been the vice president of Art Corps, and he's been an officer of the National Assembly of States Arts Agencies. Last spring, I was honored to attend a ceremony in Cheyenne where Governor Meade awarded Bruce the Governor's Art Medal. And so today, I don't actually have his title here, and it's not up there. So I'm going to let Bruce announce his title, but Bruce Richardson, please welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Lots of people to thank that they've been thanked, but we really got to acknowledge Paul Flesher here. He really conceived and got the Saturday University going. And even more than that, he's done the heavy lifting year after year to make sure that we've had good presentations and other things. And I'm the sort of person, I get involved in a whole lot of stuff, but I try to stimulate others to do the heavy lifting, and while I advise, but Paul does it all, and I just really wanted to thank him, and thanks for the invitation. We're going to rip along. Is Yellowstone a pilgrimage site? 1880, the Bozeman Courier. The world will journey to this spot more and more. The mighty pilgrimage has just begun. Well, here's Chaucer. He's probably a pilgrim. He's writing the Canterbury Tales. Buddhist monks. These look like pilgrims. What about these? Maybe so. They're in Yellowstone. But we are reminded that pilgrimage sometimes isn't just for spiritual purposes. In the Middle Ages, there were regular complaints that the pilgrims were along for the fun of the trip, for seeing novelty and wonders, and not necessarily for spiritual experience. But indeed, there's also a kind of perhaps second category of visitors to Yellowstone that might be the truly dedicated and demented, such as the geyser gazers, here gathering at a pilgrimage spot, the platform of a giant geyser, waiting for an eruption, but actually sharing an experience. And if they're lucky, they're going to see this. So, are we talking about Yellowstone as a sacred place? Well, that's an argument that's made by John Sears, and a very smart book. And Sears follows up on really some older writings in the 19th century by Thomas Cole and others, that the United States, for the European immigrants, lacked shrines and historical associations that you might have for pilgrimages, so they substituted some other things, including natural wonders and natural novelties. And this has brought us up to kind of speed with Europe, where there were plenty of cultural and spiritual places to go to. The question is this a good way to talk about Yellowstone? Well, the idea of Yellowstone as a spiritually inspiring spot that Sears discusses was picked up in this popular series by Ken Burns, the National Park series. But this isn't the only way of looking at it. We've got a fine book here by Alfred Runte, and Runte focuses on national parks and Yellowstone as sources of American pride, things that define the United States. We were a great country because we had these things. And indeed, that's sort of part of the thinking that when people talk about it today, they do. But if we go back to, can we see that? Yeah, I can see it a little bit. We go back to the early descriptions. I'm looking to see whether spiritual or pilgrimages ideas radiate through some of the writings about Yellowstone. Well, in the early things, we find this phrase wonderland and wonders, repeated here 3 times, going to the great wonderland. And indeed, a lot of the writing about Yellowstone in the early times focuses on the place as a kind of collection of odd things, novelties, almost a kind of circus of peculiar stuff that is going on. So the wonder idea continues, and it's taken advantage of by some of the advertisers. Actually, Alice in Wonderland, the book was a popular book that was published just a little bit before Yellowstone got national park designation. Then we go back and look at some of the early tourist images. We see people looking at this as a kind of show, a kind of circus. Love this guy with the jaunty, lifting his hat in salute as Old Faithful Geyser goes up. These folks here were traveling through on stagecoaches, very organized tours that had some resemblance to pilgrimages, and a lot of the people on the stagecoaches liked the trips because they got to spend time and meet the other folks that were along. When they were replaced by cars, though, Yellowstone became a kind of place where you could have drive-by wonders and drive-by experiences, drive-in geysers. So this is a kind of astounding picture of a car kind of right on the cone of Old Faithful. It's wonderful how people dressed very well in the old days. And here's a car. The car is on the cone of Punch Bowl Spring, and then the lady there is burning her hand off. And the idea of a collection of entertaining things, and also a very nationalist program, moves into our own time. Life magazine picks up Yellowstone as that. But indeed, there were astounding things there. Here's Excelsior Geyser. It's a football field-sized geyser that erupted in the 1880s up to about 300 feet, and it was a shocker. Just blew people away. Geyser's still there today. The Midway Basin, it's not doing this. It stopped. But what do people think about it? How might a researcher understand what the motivation of travelers and their attitudes toward things? Well, Mark Newman had a very smart idea. Why don't you ask some people? So Newman went to the Grand Canyon and spent a whole lot of time doing interviews, in-depth interviews, not really surveys, but conversations, and seeing what sorts of phrases people had about the Grand Canyon. And then he combined this with a review of writings about the Grand Canyon over history, and very smart and interesting study. Or you could look at this lovely book by about Yellowstone. And Alice took advantage of an interesting feature of Yellowstone for researchers, that people sit around waiting for geysers to go off. So she did surveys too about what people thought about wildlife, and did a lot of them just at Old Faithful Geyser, where people were waiting to do that. You can do sort of what I've done here, which is to look into the trove of writings that are out there about Yellowstone. And indeed, when you've got a place that's a national park, visitors have written diaries, accounts, letters, essays, and it's an enormous package of things. There's a lot of it at the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming, even more at the wonderful Yellowstone Park Museum in Gardner, Montana. And some of these writings, the more prominent ones, have been collected and anthologized, and this is a lovely collection of basically published writings by fairly well-known people, by Paul, and the Yellowstone Park historian, has done an invaluable amount of work, and then collected some other things that were less known. When I had this idea about looking at whether Yellowstone Park functioned as a pilgrimage, I wasn't going to do interviews, decided not to do interviews, but what I wanted to do was I just took a look at a cross-section of writings, chosen pretty randomly. Looked at about 150 texts and writings, and looked in a fairly simple way to see, do people talk about spiritual experience? Do they talk about pilgrimage? They use those kinds of words. And you'll find, and what I found was that sometimes I saw those words. Most of the time I didn't. Most of the time I saw people talking about other things, and I found actually a fair amount of disgruntlement, a kind of normal tourist function that afflicted my mother coming to the Grand Canyon. And we walked up to the canyon. Mom walked up to the viewpoint, looked out and said, "The postcards are better." Turned around, walked back to the car, and that was Mom's experience of the Grand Canyon. My colleague, Mark Booth, was doing a tour with his young boys, and then the one boy got to Old Faithful Geyser and wouldn't get out of the car. And his mantra was, "No more scenic wonders." I've just done that. And some of those people do that. A little of that afflicted John Muir, who traveled to Yellowstone in 1885 as a stop off on a train trip back to Wisconsin to see his father. Well, Muir apparently ate a bad sandwich at the Mammoth Hotel and had stomach indigestion, and wrote a wonderful letter back to his wife describing Old Faithful Geyser, and he said, "The geyser went up, and so did I." And the great outdoorsman was in a hurry, so he hooked up with a wedding party. A couple of newlyweds, they rode on horses, so Muir's horse broke through the crust one time and threw him. So it wasn't a terrifically good trip, but he was collecting ideas for an essay about what was a national park. And his own thoughts are, I think, in some ways really came to define partly how people appreciated and understood national parks. And he does talk about a spiritual experience, not in association with geysers, but his famous line, "Walk away quietly in any direction and taste the freedom of the mountaineer. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. And so the park could be a place of spiritual refreshment, even if it wasn't necessarily that for Muir on the trip. Muir himself, for a variety of reasons, didn't really like geysers. He didn't really like the fact that this was a volcanic environment. He was a glacier guy. He had got his career going as a shepherd in California, challenging the received notion of what Yosemite National Park was. The received notion from Josiah Whitney, the state geologist, was that a catastrophic event formed Yosemite. Basically, the bottom fell out, in one day, and kaboom, there it was. And Muir argued for the slow work of glaciers carving. He called glaciers God's writing tools that he wrote on the earth. Well, there are certainly glacial impacts in Yellowstone, but you end up noticing, in fact, the volcanism and the thermal features and so on, which were the source of some confusion to Muir, and also didn't line up with his idea of an orderly universe, an orderly world that proceeded in a kind of uniformitarian fashion. Another early traveler, one of my favorites here, is Alma White. Alma was a preacher. She traveled there in 1919 on a trip from New Jersey. She stayed at the Irma Hotel in Cody, and then paid $43 for a wagon tour of the other things. Alma is somewhat grumpy on the wagon tour, and her first grumpiness, she says, "The pretty girls got all the good seats on the wagon," and I did not. She published a book about her experiences with a preacher such as Alma White. God is with her everywhere. But she struggles with kind of figuring out where God is in Yellowstone and how it works. In one sense, she thinks the geysers are really a guide to heaven. The heart overflowed with gushing geysers, which signify the sanctified life. So she thinks about that. But on the other hand, the main emphasis that she has, she thinks the place is like hell. And it's a good reminder that if you don't follow the tenets of the sanctified life, this is what is in store for you. We live on a thin crust covering the sulfurous flames of the region below, where the rumbling of God's wrath are heard. And comes back to that very much. And this is a mud volcano. So Yellowstone works in two ways. She thinks people are sitting by the geysers, and she says, surely the folks that are watching these things are no doubt resolving to lead different lives and improving themselves. A kind of wonderful thought. You see people sitting there. But herself, Alma was not refreshed by the trip to Yellowstone. She's so tired and disgruntled by the wagon tour that she admits in the book that she stopped preaching. She just ran out of gas. So the geysers intellectually inspired her. Physically, they probably did not refresh her. Another person who wasn't very refreshed was Eleanor Corthell. She took a wagon trip from Laramie in 1903 up to Yellowstone with her 6 kids. Her husband took the train and met her up there in northern Yellowstone. She doesn't mention what their conversation was like when they hooked up again, but we can only imagine. She had a noble view, and her view was this was an important trip to help the kids' education. So it was really kind of like going up into the Wind Rivers, looking at the glaciers. And so she thought this would be an important place for doing it. But when she got up there, the place looked like hell. And quite often it's associated with a kid. She's really worried that they're going to run into the the hot pool or fall into a thermal pot or something like that. She describes a boiling, walloping vat of mud with horrid smells, awful groans, and gaping mouths clear to Hades, which aroused emotions of terror. She's worried about her kids getting into it. The upper basin, which we're looking at right here with Beehive Geyser, is like Dante's Inferno. The deposits are ghastly. The earth trembles with a strange rumbling. The air is heavy with sulfur fumes, and all vegetative life is extinct. She does like Beehive Geyser. She has an exception for that, and she was lucky enough to get to see it. Stephen Dale, who goes in 1903, not with 6 kids, doesn't think of it as like hell, but he just says, this is a place of odd stuff. I've never seen anything like this. Kind of looks like factories. It's just very weird. He did like the camaraderie of the tours, the stagecoach tours that he went through. And we will turn to, I think, a kind of interesting guy that I had not known about, working on Elbert Hubbard. Hubbard traveled there in 1914, and Hubbard was an artist activist and started an arts colony and published a number of fine print books that were done there about the lives of artists, and was very active out there. Hubbard died soon after his trip to Yellowstone. He was on the Lusitania and went down with the ship. Apparently having a chance to get in a lifeboat, and he didn't take it. For him, Yellowstone, is a kind of example of the wonders of an agency that we don't hear described in this way, the federal government. The federal government has done a great thing here in Yellowstone. They've preserved some scenery and some places that can inspire us and can inspire a nation and move people forward. And they've done this really without having a kind of heavy hand right there. For him, the national parks are kind of doing some of the work of the National Endowment for the Arts. They're inspiring imagination and creativity for everyone. And he's excited about everything there. He finds the whole trip has really revived and inspired him. And he likes the hotels. There's a long, eloquent passage describing the lobby of the Canyon Hotel, which burned down for a while, as a kind of wonderful place to meet people with all sorts of great artworks and everything in there. Hubbard is kind of an interesting notion, and it's really a notion that is a rich part of national park heritage there. The attitude a number of people have that, I should sit down and write. Or I should sit down and draw some of this. Or right now I should take a cell phone picture. So, at the end of the day, when we kind of look at this, we find some of the people like Hubbard and Muir that are looking into the underlying meanings of the place, finding something that we could regard as spiritual pilgrimage. And we can find some of the others noticing, and not in a surprising way, other features of the park that are less pilgrimage-like. This is gratuitous photography. This is a chance to see a splendid geyser that's been dormant for most of its career and erupting with Daisy Geyser. And then this is more gratuitous photography. Cascade Geyser was active in the 1890s and then abruptly resumed eruptions in 1999. Erupted for one summer. It's right up the hill from Old Faithful, enormous geyser. But what about Indians? There's been a long, persistent myth that's gone around, myth and the idea of false story, that Indians were regarded the Yellowstone area as frightening and a place to be avoided. This was an idea that General Sherman, the Civil War hero, had and repeated to the Cowan Party when he ran into them in 1877. And the Cowan party was a little worried about running into Indians there, and Sherman says, don't worry, they're scared, they're superstitious about this place, they won't be here. Well, the Cowan party then was intercepted by Chief Joseph's group that was traveling right through Yellowstone. They were traveling right on the kind of major east-west Indian highway, and with a crossing up there near Tower Bridge. And so Sherman was wrong. And in fact, we've had considerable research, some of it study by Joseph Wetzelman, that was done partly with a grant from the Wyoming Council for the Humanities, looking at examining this myth. And Wetzelman collected all the evidence and concluded, along with the archaeology that showed Indian sites all over the park and current lore and past lore, that many tribes approached Yellowstone as a sacred land for prayer and meditation, and others used the hot springs for healing, bathing, cooking, and so on. So this is an area worth some further investigation, and maybe if we're looking for a full notion of Yellowstone as a pilgrimage site, this is the place to go. But the other place we might look at it for a pilgrimage site is people that just love it and are very serious about going there. And so these would include the geyser gazers, the members of the Geyser Observation and Study Association. There might be some of you here, right there, GOSA, kind of a scientific organization in a way, publishes the Sput, and also publishes formal refereed proceedings on the geysers. And it's good science to have school teachers and folks that have got the summer off and they can sit there at the geysers for a long time and do counting, because an awful lot of the comets are found by ordinary people with backyard telescopes because they've got time to sort of scan the sky. And if you get your time on your big telescope, you're not going to be looking for a comet. And geologists are not generally going to sit at something like this, Fan and Mortar Geyser, that is dormant for years at a time, and then even when it's active, it's only once a week. There's another way to talk about this. One is hobbies and fanatical passion. And this is a feature of the United States right now that interests me quite a bit, that people organize their social lives and their spiritual lives and all of their time quite around things that you might call clubs or enthusiasm, such as the Green Bay Packers down here with the Cheesehead, or there's a chapter in this lovely book about worshipers of Barbie, the Barbie culture. My wife is a fan of the English actor Toby Stephens, and she's really a fan. And there's a lot of people around the world that are fans too. And every time Toby, who's probably none of you know or have ever heard of, acts in a play in London, women travel from all over the world. She has friends from Panama, Brazil, Poland, Georgia, and so on, and they gather together, they go see Toby in a play, they do some other activities. I asked her just before I came out here, just casually, my wife's not a religious person, and I said, would you describe this as a pilgrimage? And she says, yes. Yes. And I don't know that she thinks of it in terms of spiritual experience, but I think she thinks of it as a pilgrimage and doing a significant activity that draws this group together. That's important. And a lot of the fanatical passion. This is a fun book, by the way. And the author kind of continually bemoans the fact that she's not a member of one of these cults, and wonders what's wrong with her. But how might you become such a cultist at Yellowstone? Well, you might be drawn in by seeing an eruption of giant geyser. Giant hasn't erupted for quite a while. Sometimes it's once a year, sometimes twice a year. For a while, we had one about every week and a half or so. And I've seen 2 eruptions, so this is narrative of one. Things get exciting. little preliminary geysers get out. The geyser folks get on the radio, call the other folks. They arrive. Mastiff geyser goes off. A big geyser right in the middle, a kind of bathtub thing. Giant is the cone. Off to the right, Mastiff geyser rises. And then as Mastiff descends, Giant begins its eruption. So by now, quite a few people have arrived. And it goes up and up. This might have been a 300-footer. That's about twice the size of what you usually see in Old Faithful. The eruption lasts an hour. Makes a tremendous noise. You can't talk to anyone right there. Very addictive to see this. So the eruption we're photographing here, there were just two of us, me and one other guy sitting there, and we saw the preliminaries. So I saw it all the way through, and it had a disturbing effect on me. Made me keep going back. But in thinking about what is going on with an experience like that, I'm taken back to, I think, a feature of pilgrimage that involves not necessarily going to the spiritual spot, but finding anything in life that makes a difference to you and working at it with others. That the thing, and looking back through some of these images of the geysers and so on, I see 2 or 3 people here, and that is a kind of feature about Yellowstone. Beyond the fact that it's famous and people gather and come from all over the world, you have a sense that you are participating in something larger. And if you go to a level such as the geyser gazers have done, the participation becomes more intense and involves the other folks, so that gazers have marriages there and share each other's lives and do work together. And the work extends out to being useful as well, in spreading information about the geysers and helping with preservation attempts. And so at one point, the meaning of life can be just stuff that you like, stuff that gets you excited, stuff that makes you go after things. But it's also a sense that you're participating in something larger and doing something useful for other people. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what you want. Thanks.
There's information that the geysers were damaged by people getting to those, putting things in them. Can you tell us about that?
Oh yeah. Still certainly happens. Doesn't take much to stop something. The Cowan party that I referenced, one of the diarists on that party reports that when they went up to Old Faithful, I watched it go off, and they said, "Oh, this is really interesting." So then they threw a bunch of rocks into the funnel down there, and Old Faithful went off again and blew the rocks in the air. Then they stuffed their dirty clothes down there, and the clothes went flying in the air, and this became a bit of a novelty because this washes your clothes instantly there. So Old Faithful, and it used to have a pretty high cone. You can see from the photographs, and the pieces of the cone were broken off and taken away. Trying to think of something that got stopped. I mean, it's kind of happened. People soap up geysers too, which will start an eruption and kind of mess things up. Things stop and start on their own, though. This is really great. Pork chop geyser roaring away, big old noise, not stopping up there in Norris. And then after the big fires, boardwalk was pretty badly damaged in Norris, so they redid it. And they said, well, Pork Chop's a major attraction, so they built a spur walking right out to Pork Chop. As near as I can tell, like about 2 weeks after the spur was finished, Pork Chop exploded and stopped being a geyser and turned into a bubbly pool right there. And people would walk out and look, oh, look at this muddy little pool here, and then walk back. But that's the natural world. Not on schedule, not doing anything.
Yeah. From the very first time I went to Yellowstone, I had thought of things kind of a primeval experience. Have you ever heard that?
Oh.
Some other people feeling that way, that are going back?
Yeah, so the comment is that you can experience Yellowstone as a feeling like you're going back to the origins of the Earth or to some older period. And of course, that's part of the idea of kind of preserving the landscape in a certain intact state, pre-Columbian as much as possible. Yes, I'm one that jumps right to mind is Charles Dudley Warner, a friend of Mark Twain's, who realizes that he's looking at kind of some of the volcanic history of the planet that's exposed right here. And so he has a kind of feeling of stepping back. And certainly you can have, and that's of course mixed in with the fact that there's a road system, an extensive infrastructure, and a lot of people there too. So the opposite side of that would be my brother-in-law, who lives in a very artificial environment in Austin, Texas, and really on TV and looking at his computer all the time. Hey, he goes to Yellowstone. We're driving through. I'm in the middle of a traffic jam caused by an elk, up there by Norris. And he'd been there a couple of days, and all of a sudden he bursts into this rhapsody. It's like I'm back at the beginning of things. It's like there's no one here. It's like we're apart from civilization completely. And he was partly referencing the fact that there were no TVs in the hotels, I think, threw him for a loop. But also kind of, it was quite humorous to me because most anyone from Wyoming would have thought this traffic jam was far from a primeval experience that we were having. And I've made fun of him over the years for this comment, but after a while I kind of thought about it. I wanted to honor that because actually he was having the kind of experience that you'd want somebody who lives in an artificial environment to have. And even if he was getting it in a traffic jam right there, it's still a valuable experience. He kind of stopped talking to me. I wrote a piece about dangerous Yellowstone, about people being frightened, and he called me up one time, and he's a guy that gets panicky about these internet reports, and so he said, "God, I hear the volcano's about to go," and I said, I don't think so, and I went back and kind of looked at some of the stuff, and I said, no, it's not going to go, and he said, well, I really wanted to be able, my kids to see this before it blew up, and I told him, I said, well, probably that's not going to be the big problem. If there was this big eruption, how you can travel to South America is going to be sort of the issue that's coming. Thanks very much.